Hello everybody. The last decade in the automotive world has been a tumultuous one, with an incredible number of firsts and an equal number of lasts. And what we have here today is yet another example of one of those. For this is the final combustion engine powered Audi R8, and maybe the last car ever to wear the R8 nameplate. And as is customary, its maker has created a special edition to wave it goodbye. But I think with this final showing of its iconic supercar, Audi has actually shown one of its brightest suns a fair amount of disrespect. So why is that? And am I wrong? Well, find out in today's episode of JM on Cars. Cast your mind now back to 2011. The world was finally emerging from the effects of the financial crisis, and the R8, still in its first guise, was a car that was still turning heads. This was something that gave 911 owners food for thought and made people with an Aston Martin Vantage go, because now, in V10 guise, this was a car that gave you supercar performance for nearer to sports car money. But ahead of its first facelift, Audi wanted to celebrate easily one of their most popular cars of the last decade in style. And so they did with the introduction of the first R8 GT. The recipe for the first generation GT was much the same as its sister car, the Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera. So it combined a more powerful variant of the R8's V10, now making 560 horsepower, with a lighter curb weight, the GT being the lightest of all R8 variants, including the V8. You then got more aggressive aero, bucket seats inside, and a retrimmed interior to remind you that at all points in time you were in something a little bit special. And this extended to the driving experience as well. Spend even a couple of minutes behind the wheel of one of these and you will learn very quickly this is no ordinary R8. But unfortunately, because they came only with the single clutch automated manual R-tronic gearbox, even in their day they were a car overlooked by many. But now I think they really do deserve a second chance. This one belongs to my good buddy Ant, and it's been seen on both my channel and his a number of times. He's owned it now for about 4 years, and I know exactly why he is unwilling to part with it, because it really is that good. I remember very well my first experience of a GT, which was a Spider, much like this. I drove it back to back with its technical successor, the facelift special edition, the R8 LMX. And though that had a fraction more power, and on paper this should have been the inferior car. Being a Spider, it was heavier, down on power. Nothing could have been further from the truth. You get behind the wheel of this, compare it with any other R8, and you just got the impression there was so much more going on with this than Audi were ever willing to admit. So naturally, when Audi announced they were rounding off R8 production with a new GT, both he and I were very excited. And then we saw it, and we both went, Because though it does look, admittedly, very good with plenty of carbon goodies, these canards, this lovely swan neck rear spoiler, it was also somewhat familiar because for us petrol-heady anoraks, you might remember another R8 special edition from a few years ago called the R8 Performance Parts Edition. And that was a car imported to Britain in a quantity of just 5. And the point of that car, apparently, was to remind us of just how much Audi UK have been shafting their customers for the past decade. Because were you to order an R8 on the continent, when you did so, you would be given a whole host of optional extras you could have fitted to it, from the likes of special colours through Audi's individual programmes to stuff like the spoiler, those wheels, plenty of the carbon goodies. But here in Britain, we never got the chance. So to give customers here an opportunity, they imported 5 of these cars fully laden. And so you would be forgiven for wondering what exactly it is about the GT that is genuinely unique, that you can get on no other R8? Well, allow me to tell you. This car has a newer version of the 7-speed dual-clutch gearbox that Audi brand S-Tronic. It has different ratios for 3rd to 7th and apparently faster shift times. You also have a new selectable traction control mode called Torque Rear Drive, this being simply a 2-wheel drive variant. And you've also got a black intake manifold. That's about it. According to Audi insiders, the biggest actual change with this car is the specially developed R8 GT coilover suspension. But that is an optional extra, and I'm not sure if this car has it. I'm not being lazy, I asked Audi, and they said they didn't know. So hopefully, by the time this video goes out, I'll have found out, and I'll put the answer here. But all in, it does feel like a bit of a parts bin special. Open the door and you'll be greeted with a fairly familiar R8 interior. They couldn't even be bothered to make a special plaque for it. It just says rear wheel drive as it would in the base model of the car. The GT badging is hidden just below the gear selector, and to be honest, is rather underwhelming. When you look at what Porsche get to do every single week with the 911 and what Lamborghini have done with the Huracan, you've got the Starato, the STO, and now the Technica. For a car that has done so much for the firm as this has, I feel like it's really just been sort of wheeled out rather quietly. And that is a shame, because this genuinely is one of the all-time greats, and I feel like its own maker just wants it to go home without a fuss. However, I did find out one other little factoid that was of great interest. Officially speaking, Audi claim this car is just 20 kilos lighter than the regular V10 rear-wheel drive. But when I checked my handy little website that compares manufacturers' quoted weights with real ones, I found that though, yes, in the manufacturer's specs, that is true, in the real world, this is actually more like 60 kilos lighter, making it, in fact, the second lightest R8 ever, after, you've guessed it, the first generation R8 GT Coupe. So is this yet another example of the Germans being needlessly modest? Is this actually a car that is far more than the sum of its parts? Well, let's find out on the only place that matters, the road. No. Which is not the same as to say it's a bad car, because it isn't. And on account of the fact that the vast majority of it is identical to every other second generation R8, it of course shares all of their strengths. And we'll start with that engine, which is mighty. In fact, any and every time it's appeared in a car, it has always been a highlight. Today, more than ever, it may be something of an anachronism, but still, it is a joyous power plant. It sings all the way to its near 9,000 RPM redline, and while yes, at 2,000 RPM, stab your foot down and it simply won't go like it would in a turbocharged car, it's still got plenty of shove, more than enough for you to have quite a bit of fun. It is an absolute joy, and to be honest, it is one of the few pieces of the car I can kind of forgive them for just leaving alone. The same really also goes for the chassis, which is a combination of aluminium with a few sections of carbon fibre. The logic there being that in the event of an accident, because most of it is aluminium, it'll be a little bit easier to repair, but by making a few key sections, chiefly this bit and this bit, out of carbon, you get a little bit of extra strength. It's then double wishbone, front and rear, and yes, though the results may be somewhat heavier than the equivalent Ferrari and certainly McLaren, there is a level of build quality throughout this entire car that is simply alien to either of those brands. And it's in the smallest of things, like the way the windows go down. So smooth and effortless. This interior, it may be getting on a bit now, close to 8 years old, but it's still one of my absolute favourites. So elegant, so simple. One digital display in front of the driver, and you really don't ever need to take your hands off the wheel to do just about anything. Should you or your passenger want to help out, there are the usual controls from an Audi of about 8 years ago down here, but you don't need them. The whole thing works really, really well. Granted, the interior is also the source of a couple of my gripes, one being the fact that for some reason with these second generation cars, the first day or two, they always feel a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe it's because of the distribution of my height, but there's just something about them. When I get in, I just feel really, really cramped. It was a particular issue in the Spider, which is physically smaller inside, but even in this coupe, it's a bit of a weird sensation. After 2 or 3 days, and now about 6 in, it feels perfectly normal, but it's just an odd thing. It does take some getting used to. The material choice also. The last R8 I drove, they ditched this horrible gardening glove stuff, which I think actually made its first appearance in the original GT, but here it's back. And I've never liked it. It's always felt and looked rather cheap and nasty to me. I like the diamond stitching on the ceiling. That is a nice touch, but this, awful. These seats also, I'm in a couple of minds about. I know this car has optional, I think, carbon buckets, but these are not those. If for no other reason than they're not carbon. They're not the comfiest of all second-gen R8 seats. They're the sporty version, but though they're decent, I mean, very, very good, I'll be fair about that, they just don't seem to suit the character of this car. And in fact, that is really my major gripe of it. If you're sat here right now in traffic going nowhere, there is really next to nothing to tell you you're in anything special. This is 200 grand, and I just think more effort should have really been put in. I also, as it happens, have now managed to get in touch with Audi, who came back and told me this car is fitted with the regular GT suspension, not the optional coilovers. And this baffles me, I have to be completely honest about that, because first off, I don't know why anybody would have a GT without the GT suspension. That's the biggest bit of the whole package. I also don't know why Audi themselves would spec the press car without the GT suspension, but regardless, this setup I really do not like. First up, it's passive. This is 2024. Heck, 15 years ago, Audi were giving you MagRide as standard in some of the R8s. These days, you could spend a quarter of this much money on a car and get adaptive dampers as standard. Ferrari, Porsche, McLaren and the like have shown you just how much you can do with a car if you have a very trick set of adaptive dampers and you set them up right. Though I am personally a big fan of a well set up passive system, when you're spending this amount of money, I expect a little bit more. I could forgive the GT setup being passive, and like with Ferrari's 296, I could appreciate maybe that's the compromise. If you want the ultimate in ride, if you want the ultimate performance car, you can have it, but you sacrifice your adaptive damping. Here though you're not, and instead what you're left with is a suspension that is just constantly fidgety. The whole time it feels unsettled. At no point does it ever feel like it really begins to work. I expect, in fact, it probably does, but at a speed that is maybe 30 miles an hour or so beyond the national speed limit. Far too fast, in other words, for me to really get the best from it on my preferred driving roads. And again, you could say, yes, but James, this is the R8 GT, it's designed for circuit use. And my response to that will be, yes, I know. And those people are gonna spec the optional GT suspension. I'd love to tell you what it's like, but from here I just can't, and honestly, this suspension doesn't work. It never, ever lets up. Even on the motorway, you just sat there doing that. Very, very frustrating. Other genuine changes that Audi have made include the new torque rear drive system and, of course, a few tweaks to the gearbox, which I am happy to say have actually made a difference. But it's not a universal improvement. If I were to name one thing about this car that has definitely changed for the better, it is the gearbox. When you put it in performance mode by pressing the little checkered flag down here and you're having a little bit of fun, you get this. Whoa. Well, you actually couldn't see that there because What I was trying to show you was the nice jolt you get on a sort of spicier upshift. What instead was demonstrated was one of the car's biggest problems. There you go, that's the jolt you kind of get in this that is missing from other R8s. But the problem here, which you just saw, is the fact that because they've chosen to make this a two-wheel drive car, traction's a problem. In fact, I would say of nearly all of the supercars that I've driven, barring classic ones, this has to be the most traction limited. It has been a very, very frustrating week. And yes, I know I've not really had the conditions for it. It's never been more than about 10 degrees, and basically the whole time it has been damp. But the car is on Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres, easily the best for these conditions. The car also has that new fancy pants torque rear drive traction control system, and honestly, it's lethal. Genuinely, I thought the other day I'd have a little bit of a play with it, see what it'd do, because for the most part I've been driving it in its most restrictive settings, sort of 1 and 2 on the out of 7 scale. So then I got onto a clear, empty piece of road with nobody about, and I thought, let's see what happens when you dial it down to its minimum interference and you simply plant it. What happened was I nearly crashed the car, because unlike a Ferrari system, which will use the trick E differential at the back to keep you going straight ahead even when the traction is effectively off, this doesn't. The whole time I've had this car, it has been constantly squirming, and at times when it really probably shouldn't have been. It's a little bit scary. And I also just don't like the concept of Audi making their big finale swan song R8 rear-wheel drive. It seems like a sort of lazy thing to do. If you want that, go buy the Lamborghini Huracan Technica or whatever you want. Audi, though, their thing is Quattro. And I've always said that this platform really does feel like it has been built for all-wheel drive. It's never really had an elegance about it when it's a two-wheel drive thing. And the fact is, in four-wheel drive, guys, because it's a Haldex system, the car doesn't drive the front wheels if it doesn't need to. It doesn't really even add all that much weight. But in these conditions, it would add quite a bit more confidence and stability. I was filming a piece for our second channel, JAYEMM Friends, the other day, and I took this out, then followed by Anthony's original R8 GT Spider. And the fact is, I felt so much more at home in that. Partly because it had the better grip, partly because it had better steering, but also because the suspension really felt like it was working so much better. It actually felt both softer and firmer, that car. Very, very interesting. And the suspension felt like it was working at twice the refresh rate of this. It did just feel a lot more sophisticated. The brakes are mighty, I will give them that. These carbon stoppers, they are fantastic, which has been very useful, particularly with conditions as mixed as they are. The steering, meanwhile, feels exactly the same as it does in just about every other second generation R8. Are you surprised? Which is to say, at low speeds it's a little bit too heavily assisted, but as the speed piles on, the assistance bleeds away, and it reveals a helm that, though not the most colourful in texture, is still very engaging. Traction, though, it's getting warmer now and drier, but even so, it's really, really difficult to put my foot down here. Get it to $6,000 though, and this thing digs in. That is where you notice the difference between this engine and some of the other variants. They all pull a little harder at the top, but this one really goes for it. Another thing I will say for it is that compared with the Huracan Evo rear-wheel drive that I tested a few years ago up in Scotland, it doesn't like to hit the ground quite as much. Though it still has tapped the floor on the odd occasion, it has been a relatively rare occurrence. With that, just about every time you go over a bump or a crest, it's accompanied with a sort of rather disconcerting crunch. most gear shifts really can be quite brutal. If anything, on the downshift, when you're not really going that fast, when you're sort of doing 7/10, they can feel a little bit unsophisticated. You're sort of thrown about in the seat. It reminds me of the bad old days of single clutch automated manuals. Actually, I know a few of those that are a little bit smoother than this. Ultimately, that rear end, this traction control system, makes the car feel like something from a different decade. Because it is. I keep seeing reviews of people talking about modern Lamborghinis and the like and saying, oh, I don't like it because it doesn't feel like it's going to kill me anymore. Well, get in one of these and turn the traction control down to its minimum setting. You'll get the car that you want, I promise you. This thing is properly hairy, but not in an exciting way. It doesn't talk to me in a way that, say, a Diablo does, a 360, something like that, or even a McLaren 570. It just never really comes alive in that brilliant way. And honestly, at any point during this week, had you offered to me, do you want to swap this for that yellow rear-wheel drive Spider, the base model that I had in June last year? Yeah, I'd have done it. Even with the weather a bit rubbishy like it is, I'll turn the heater up and I'll just enjoy the roof down thing, get a little bit more in the noise, and the fact is, not really going to get any more performance out of this in these conditions. There's other small little things you begin to notice too. I had to laugh to myself when I tried to put my phone in the little wireless cradle down here, and I realised it's basically too big, because when this car was built, phones were about 3/4 of the size that they are now. And I think most damningly, gearbox aside, if you were to put me in this car, blindfolded, and not told me what I was in, of course I'd tell you it's a second-gen R8. But which one? I'd have basically no idea. I can tell you it was rear-wheel drive, but that's about it. I'm just perplexed because there were so many things that Audi could have done just to put that little bit more effort in here. Yes, I know it has more downforce than any other R8, 300 kilos at 199 mile an hour, but first of all, that's not actually a huge quantity compared to, say, your GT3 911s and the like. But also, I want to feel the difference. I want to feel this car. And on the road, you're not going to feel the extra downforce. Yeah, the wing looks cool and all that, but as we've already discussed, actually, it was an optional extra that Audi already had. With this car being so close to being the lightest ever R8, I would have loved to have seen them pursue that a little bit further. You know, give me a carbon bonnet, give me some nice big carbon door cards, maybe even go really hardcore and say, actually, by default, you don't get a stereo, or you don't get air conditioning, or something like that. I'm certain some more weight could have been saved by fitting an even more aggressive pair of bucket seats in this, a lightweight battery, that sort of thing. You could have pulled another 40-50 kilos out of the car, put the GT suspension on as standard, and maybe then it would have felt just a little bit different. As it is, though, I just sit here looking at it going, they couldn't be bothered really, could they? It was like the development team got given a budget of 500 quid. Sorry lads, you can't really do anything that's that new. That's your lot. And yes, I know, look, they're not making all that many, 333, which is another nod to the original car, and just 15 of those are coming to Britain. You couldn't buy one if you wanted to, they're already all sold out. But let's just pretend for a second that you could. Your 200 grand would get you into quite a lot of other machinery I'd find considerably more exciting. Granted, not much out there that would be new, because just about all of this car's rivals are going to cost more, with the exception of the GT3, that we know full well you also can't buy new. However, 200 grand would get you into a McLaren 600 LT, 570S, 650S with quite a bit of change, actually about half the price of one of these, would get you into any number of different 911 GT3s, Cayman, GT4 RS, Ferrari 488. That's a car that to me is far more exciting to drive. Even though it's the plain base model, it's just alive. It's a wonderful thing. That money would also now get you into a Huracan Performante, although as I haven't driven one of those, I couldn't really tell you if it was better or not, but at least it has a Raging Bull on it rather than the 4 rings, and therefore a little bit more theatre and drama, if that's your sort of thing. Again, like just about every other R8, it still has a pathetically small boot. It has no front lift, and now with those extra additions up that end, it's also a slightly less usable car than it ever was. Combine that with the frustrating suspension, and it's just not a car that you'd actually want to use day to day. Where exactly they did shave those extra kilos from in comparison to the regular rear-wheel drive, I couldn't say, but I certainly can't feel the difference, and that's disappointing. It's a very, very fast car, but then so are all the others that I mentioned, and though I'm sure the people that have bought one are very, very happy with their purchase, and so they should be, I just can't help but shake that feeling. Audi have really, really disrespected one of their finest sons. It's like being the student that came home after 20 years away. Where have you been, son? Oh, I got a PhD, then I cured cancer, became an astronaut, went to the moon, and that's nice. What about your flamboyant brother? Oh, he's in a band. He's playing the pub next month, and for some reason, it's the flamboyant brother that got the inheritance. Who knows? Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to Audi for lending me this car, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.